And now, welcome our panelists and moderator.
What we're going to start with, I've already mentioned a little bit about you folks and why we have you on board. And what we really do want to learn from you. So I'll start off with Mara. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the changes that you have been doing in your organization in Osler?
Sure. And thanks for including me, because you're absolutely right. Law is steeped in tradition and precedent, and it isn't one of the industries that you expect to change that much. And actually, I think I was happy to see that on Claudette's list, we were not in that top 5. I could take a little bit of a breath. But we are changing, and we've come a long way. I'd say we've come a long way from the time at which I thought the advent of yellow Post-it notes to put on the signature pages of documents was innovation. Now we use DocuSign. So, I mean, we've been an organization that's been very focused on efficiency and dedicating resources to it through our knowledge management program for quite a few years. And so that's really morphed over the last 20 years away from just being precedents and checklists into process, how we do our work, the technology we use, looking at processes, people, and technology. And so it's really been in the last 5 years, as the technology has evolved, that we've really started been putting these new tools in. And in law, the 2 areas that are hit the most with artificial intelligence is e-discovery and due diligence, because both of those areas involve a review of hundreds of documents. And so that machine learning can play a huge role. So that certainly we put tools in litigation and due diligence. We also have put tools in place that do prediction and research. So actually interesting, I think in Nick's session this morning, he talked about the agile organization and having a mix of independent contractors or employees. Well, one of our tools, I mean, we didn't create it, we bought it, but will actually predict whether a court will look at an employment relationship and say whether that's an employee would actually be determined to be an employee or an independent contractor. So we're using those tools. On the automation side, I'd say automation versus robotics. I'm not sure that we have any robotics, although I can tell you I want that robot outside for my Innovation Month next year. But we put in a fair amount of automation, particularly for document automation, and certainly bringing efficiency to how we create our documents does create a core efficiency for us, because that's what we sell. It's our knowledge in our heads, but it ultimately gets integrated into the documents, so that is our product. So being able to streamline the creation of those has been important. And then we've also put automation in on corporate closings and signings and places like that. So it's not hitting every lawyer or every practice yet, but we're certainly on the upswing.
Okay, awesome. And Jay, if you could tell us a little bit about some of the work you're doing in AI, and also you work with helping clients and organizations implement AI solutions in terms of the AI solutions you develop. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. So essentially, like what we do is that we are an artificially intelligent video soft skill assessment tool, and we shortlist the best fit talent for a hiring manager to interview. And our technology actually has a core focus on diminishing unconscious bias. So we work with organizations such as IBM, large banks, education companies, to really transform their like talent acquisition function and give them that like strategic and that competitive advantage.
Okay. That's interesting. I have a question that just popped to mind, but I'll go first of all to Daniel. And so Daniel, tell us a little bit about what you do. So you definitely work with a lot of clients, and you've been doing a lot of research in the area of AI and the disruptive technologies, and you help guide clients to make that decision on how to adopt it. So tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Dan Marquez. I'm a leader in Accenture's strategy practice. I focus on digital strategy, technology strategy, and enterprise disruption. So that's a very straightforward answer for who I am and what I do. The thing that I find really interesting and where I've spent a lot of the time in my career is in understanding where we're going and how does that translate into the ways that organizations need to think differently about themselves. So about a year ago, Accenture launched this program called the Innovation Fellowship, of which I am a member. And as part of that, I started down a path of exploring the concept of enterprise disruption. Now, I think a lot of people talk about it. It comes up all the time. It's a nice, neat, straightforward word. But the intention was to really understand, what does that word actually mean? What does it mean for an organization to be disrupted? And we started to come up with some really interesting insights as we dug into those concepts. Right? So we recognize that that disruption is not just one thing, right? It's a pretty complex kind of change that can affect an organization. We recognize that trying to just match disruption point for point is a really ineffective way for an organization to approach shaping its strategy. And we landed on this concept of enterprise resilience as the more important thing for an organization to try and achieve, right? So how do we become more resilient to uncertainty? How do we become more likely to hold up in the face of unknown change, right? And that, I think, is a much more powerful concept. And the underpinning of that is something that we've coined an enterprise meta model. So organizations have an operating model. It's how we do work. They have a business model. It's what is it that we do that creates value. But the thing that people don't talk about, and the secret sauce that tends to make the really powerful companies effective, is the way that they drive change and what change means to that organization. So that's where I focus a lot of my effort, and on helping organizations realize how do they bake that into their DNA.
Okay, awesome. So I want to come back to you, Jay. You said something about unconscious bias, and that's something that we've touched on a little bit today. And could you go in a little bit more into that? Because you have to actually develop softwares and applications and, dealing with unconscious bias. So do you want to share about, the unconscious bias and what role that has to play, and what we hear as individuals, how it impacts us and what we can do differently?
Absolutely. So I mean, initially when we developed our technology, it's from thousands and thousands of videos. And as Carol was even talking about earlier in the day, is we need to have representation. And representation among your team, among the engineers in the data set. So you're making sure that no gender, ethnicity, race is not being assessed fairly. That's the number one thing with AI technology. Now secondly, since we are in recruitment, so we're making predictions and correlations to success predictors. And we had an immense amount of resistance from legal, because as you guys can imagine, right? I mean, it's there are these 20-something year olds coming to IBM and saying we're going to revolutionize your talent acquisition process using AI, and they were just what? What is this? This is black magic. It's voodoo. Mm-hmm. So just to educate them and really get them to understand how we've built that our AI technology, how we have representation, how we're diminishing unconscious bias. It took us about 8 months, and we had to make sure that we had the right sponsorship. We engaged with the right stakeholders, and eventually the individual to pull the trigger was out of the U.S. So it was quite the cycle. And what I would recommend is that sometimes organizations in Canada, if they are fearful, then look for the parent company, because usually in the U.S. they tend to take a lot more risk. So I mean, that was my takeaway from this experience.
And so taking that back to Mara, when you think about some of the technology automation and the AI that you had to implement within your organization, which were probably a little bit resistant from some of what I've read, the studies out there with other legal firms. Some legal firms have really struggled to be able to introduce AI into their organization because the lawyers feel why would they know better than me? You know, I know everything. I don't need this, you know, solution type of thing. And Jay just spoke about how, you know, he had to go through that education process in order to get buy-in from people. What's been your own experience in your organization in introducing AI?
Yeah, I think a couple of things to that point. So definitely, we all know lawyers are skeptical, and lawyers are trained to find the holes in everything in the worst case scenario. That is what they are paid for. So there's no doubt that when AI comes in, they do query it, and plus they view themselves as experts. Mm-hmm. So what is the algorithm behind this system? They want to understand it. So for a lot of it, we run pilots and tests. So with our due diligence software, we literally took a set of documents and we said, you students, go and do your due diligence in your traditional way. And you know, then we'll have a other set who are going to run it using the tool. And using that way, we could actually see the results and see how faster it could be done, and with the level of quality, and often a higher level of quality, because humans are prone to error. We don't like to admit it. But by running those tests, we could get over it. And what it established, and the message that we are always trying to get across, and I think it came up earlier, is that it's never the system alone or the people alone. The best is the students and associates with the technology. It augments their role. But we had to run those tests over and over and over again to get people comfortable. But once they were, you know, then they'll buy in and use it. And similarly, we participated in a beta of one of the prediction tools that came out of U of T. So we were on their beta. We got them to use it when it didn't matter, so they weren't, you know, relying their legal advice on it. The other thing we did to get around that a little bit, and to help with adoption on some of our tools as well, is we've pushed them into separate groups. So we've created low-cost centers of excellence for routine corporate transactions that work, the components of corporate work and litigation. And they're the ones that use these tools now. So those teams are dedicated to that type of work. We push the work to them. They use it daily, which means they know the AI, they've learned it, they're training it, they're coming up with new ways to use it, as opposed to just putting it out there and say, okay, everybody who does due diligence, you can use this tool now. We're saying, no, push your due diligence to this group and it will use the tool. And so the adoption and use of it, and the adoption of the group has skyrocketed.
Awesome, awesome. And Daniel, you mentioned something, you used the word DNA, you know, driving change and making it part of the DNA. Could you go a little bit more into that in terms of what are some of those first steps that organizations need to start doing or preparing before they think, okay, we want to, you know, introduce AI or robotics or disruptive technologies?
Sure. In my perspective, organizations usually go about this the wrong way, right? So they go about it from one dimension or another, but rarely is that enough, right? Often you'll see an organization tries to drive change top down. So leaders say, I read about AI yesterday and we need some. And somehow that's supposed to create change. Or, you know, there's a little pocket starts to just do things a little bit differently, and that's neat. Or there's an innovation lab, and that's cool. I usually tell my clients, whenever they're talking about trying to drive innovation, if anyone describes their innovation program as cool, it means it's dead. Because it's not enough, right? So I say that it has to be a pincer move, right? It has to be top down meets bottom up, with the right mandate, the right degree of independence, and the right people involved to actually make it happen. So not a big ask or anything, but it is entirely possible. And when I talk about the DNA, what I'm saying is that as we've started to study some of these organizations that have really managed to crack the code on doing this and doing this consistently, and one of the speakers earlier said a word that got me excited because it's in a lot of the material that we've published on the topic. Cannibalism. Sorry, I should contextualize that. Cannibalistic disruption is something that some organizations have managed to master, and it means when do I recognize that I need to sacrifice a cash cow that I have today in order to be positioned for the future? Apple circa 2007 was really good at this, right? They sacrificed the iPod at the altar of the iPhone. They sacrificed, to some extent, the iPhone at the altar of the iPad, and then they completely stopped innovating. So coming at this from a bunch of different directions is really critical, and that DNA is what some of these organizations have managed to tap into, and it's how do we embed the importance of change, that innovation-first mentality, into the culture of our entire organization. And I usually say that innovation doesn't follow this kind of linear maturity curve. When you usually see a maturity curve, right, it's this nice, smooth flow from the bottom left to the top right of a 2x2 grid, and then a consultant asks you for $100,000. It's shaped like a C, right? So it goes from like decentralized and bad to centralized and okay, right? Now we have a process, we have a team, we have a machine, a system. And then it moves back towards decentralized as it gets really mature, and it moves back out to the entire organization, right? Apple in its heyday, a really good example I saw was someone realized that some iPods were going to ship without a full charge, and people were going to turn them on and be sad because they didn't work. And so that person drove to the factory and manually worked with the factory team to recharge 20,000 devices so they would ship, right? That appetite to be at the front of innovation across the organization, that's the apex. But if you get there and then you just let it lie, eventually you don't go backwards along the sea, you just fall right back down to zero.
Okay, so it's not something to take for granted.
No.
Mara, you've internal or part of the organization, and we have Jay, who a little bit external. We have Daniel, who is external as a consultant. So with you, when you were implementing, or your organization was implementing AI and robotics, how did you work with external vendors? You referred earlier to choosing having a software solution or vendor solution, introducing it into the organization. So how do you tend to make those decisions within your organization in terms of what to introduce and how to introduce and who to introduce it with?
Well, so first, the what to introduce. I think this comes back to tying it to strategy. So we really looked for the pockets of the firm that were being driven by the market and by clients to push for efficiency, fixed fee arrangements, where the partners were really incented to bring efficiencies in. So look for those pockets, and then look across at what the pain points were and where AI could have the biggest impact. And in choosing tools, we did demos. We tried to include lawyers so that they could see the tools and have a bit of a voice. We didn't work. We didn't work a lot with vendors, other than in a pretty traditional way of bringing vendors in to do demos and respond to pitches and stuff like that. We didn't hire a consultant to help us do it. We were picking a tool for due diligence, for closings or whatever it is. That being said, we do look for vendors who we can partner with, because a lot of the technology that we're using in law is still new. A lot of it is still very emerging. And so we want vendors that we can partner with and provide feedback to and tell them what the next level of functionality is that we want. So we definitely look for vendors who are willing to take that. We're actually partner with Ryerson's Legal Innovation Zone. We sponsor them and work a lot with some of their tech startups to provide feedback and for us to learn more about what they're doing, and them to learn what our security requirements are, and how to sell to big firms. So we find that helps.
Okay, that's a recurring theme, partnership and collaboration and working closely. And Jay, you've been on the outside coming into organizations and working closely with organizations. So what has been the learning points? What's it been like having to introduce a new solution? You touched on that a little bit. And I also want us to touch on, the role of change management methodologies when it comes to leading and implementing change, because I know we spoke about that much earlier on, using change management tools. So would love to hear your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So So what we take a look at, and to be like very honest, like I have recently, appreciated the value of change management methodology. And Samir Masood, who I believe is sitting over there of Impact Consulting, has been a great help to our startup. And like what we do is that we take a look at, like, first of all, like the why. Like, why is this organization driving AI change? Like, what is the real like reason behind it? Because there are a lot of like failed digital transformations. So we need to make sure that they're not just trying to like jump on the bandwagon. That's number one. Number two is that like once we actually like figure out that this AI technology is going to provide the organization a competitive edge, at that stage we start to work like with either an internal champion or our sponsor. Because like what happens is that when that change is coming from that top down and we get the buy-in from other executives, it's a lot easier as the time goes on for them to run other like little projects. So that part is also extremely important. And our goal is to like bring the cycle like fully back. So now like what we're doing is that with a chief talent scientist or a CHRO, we look for like specific attributes in new hires who at the moment might be stakeholders, but they might be like sponsors in a couple of years. So we look at correlations of success predictors. So for example, somebody who has a growth mindset, somebody who's very, very like collaborative, very innovative, somebody who's very open to change. So using industrial organizational psychology for now some of the roles, we look for these attributes so that change in the future is going to be a lot easier with less resistance.
Okay, awesome.
Can I just
Yeah, sure.
jump in for shortly as well? One of the things that we did on the change management side, which I think is unique in law firms, is we actually hired on staff a full-time change management consultant. We brought someone in about 3 years ago because up until then, we all thought we did change management, but really all we did was talk. We talked, and we thought that would change everything, and guess what? It didn't. So we actually brought on a full-time change management consultant who not only led the change on a number of major projects, but also trained all our senior people on the principles of change management and helped us develop our change leadership toolkit. So that was really great for us.
I referred to an example earlier when we had Claudette on. I got into this project, and the first thing, as a change lead, the first thing the project manager said to me, "Oh, I have change management experience as well," So I said, "Okay, fine, great. This is somebody I can work with," And then they now proceeded to tell me, "Why do you keep on talking to all the stakeholders? Why do you need to talk to them? You have to wait until they come to talk to you, ask questions. Don't bother them. Don't speak to them." I was like, okay. I found that really funny as a change person, as somebody who said they had change experience, because that's a field which is evolving. So a lot more people are learning about it. Some people feel they know about it already, and some people do know about it already. So, but it's definitely a field that's evolving, and kudos to you for realizing that, let's bring in somebody that really knows this to be able to support us in executing on it, so kudos to you there. And Daniel, going back to you, you did speak about culture, and I wanted to, or DNA, which was the word you used, and I equate that to culture. How can organizations be more anticipatory? How can they start to think, how do I prepare for this? What do I need to do? And I think we've already mentioned a little bit where Mara said, you think about your strategy, your why, where there's the biggest impact before you start to implement, decide to implement some of those changes. And Jay attributed to, what's the why? But how can organizations be more anticipatory and prepared, in advance of this if they're not already doing it?
Sure. So I'll answer that, and I'm going to clarify one thing about my comment on DNA. So I think that the DNA, right, this meta model of an organization, which is the structure by which it changes itself. It changes its business model, it changes its operating model. It has a lot of different pieces. Culture is one part. Culture is is the emotional relationship between everyone inside that organization and the organization as a whole. but who are they having that relationship with? The organization has an identity. That's one part of the DNA as well. So culture is the relationship between each individual in the organization and the organization as an anthropomorphized person, right? So what is my relationship with my bank? What is my relationship with my employer? Not in terms of them paying me and me doing work, but in terms of how I feel about them. Do I like them? Do I care? All those things. In terms of what an organization can do, right, to start being anticipatory, I think it really comes down to where you're allocating your resources, where you're allocating the effort and the resources that you have as an organization. And I like coming back to a lot of the examples, right? Blockbuster, BlackBerry, Sears, a lot of organizations that at the time had enormous resources at their disposal, had tons of goodwill, amazing positioning in the market, and yet did not manage to take advantage of those resources to anticipate where the world was going. And I think that comes down to not investing in the ability to understand yourself, right? So that's one piece, is put in place the capabilities at arm's length that are focused on figuring out where I suck at what I do. So that's one. I think two is the foundational stuff, right? If you realize, man, it's time to change, perfect. We have 6 years of technology debt to pay off first. Okay, well, I guess I can't move very fast. So things like investing in technology, things like investing in keeping your processes modern, investing in building engagement with your people, understanding your people, that's a big piece, right? So it's keeping your foundation streamlined and effective that makes it easier to pivot when the time comes. And third is, how are your leaders evaluated? Right? I think a lot of times organizations will find their most innovative people, they'll empower them, those people will come up with something amazing, drive it all the way up, and it'll change the way the organization operates. And then, what is that person's priority? Is it to change the organization again? No. It is to sit on that thing that made them a leader in the first place and make sure that nothing else changes from now on, right? So, and you see it all the time, right? It's like, oh, well, we're an innovative organization. We created this thing. Now, no one do anything else, because this is my baby. But the organizations that have managed to crack the code on this, they reward people for change. They reward people for that what's next mentality, right? It shouldn't be, hey, we're done, finished, right? I really love the slide that we saw earlier about the hospital, because it was like, perfect, we did it. Let's do so many more things immediately, right? And I think that being how you evaluate your leaders is really important. And the structure of a lot of organizations today, which is very functional, very hierarchical, it makes it really hard to make that change happen.
Awesome. And taking this to Mary, when people hear the word change or they hear the word change leadership, they immediately or easily equate it to the CEO or the top leaders. It's their responsibility. It's not my pay grade, for me to do this, or the individual contribute to things. I'm a SME, it's not for me to do this, or the senior manager, I don't have the authority or responsibility. So with your organization in terms of leading change, what were the various roles what role did the CEO play to the middle management, to the individual contributor that seemed as though they did not have authority? Yeah,
and I think I'll speak in the present more than the past, because I think we're still very much on this journey. Mm-hmm. So I mean, personally, I think the role that has been played at our firm and that works is that the role of the senior lead, and say that's our managing partner, our board of directors, is really to set that vision, to set the strategy. I work with our managing partner so that every time he speaks, he mentions innovation, he mentions efficiency, he mentions that stuff, along with anything else. So I think that's their role. Then we have people like our partner, who is our national innovation lead, all the chiefs that we have, that I'm one of. And then we also have an innovation council and an innovation advisory group, and they're partners. Those I consider the change leads. So our role is to, within our own areas, to walk that talk and to be implementing ideas, looking for ideas, talking to people. And so particularly at the partners, we tell them, the partners that are on the council and the advisory group, this is their role, is to be within their groups, talking to their partners, looking in their own practices, where are those inefficiencies and stuff. And then you have all of them empowering the SMEs and every associate, every partner, and everybody on the admin side to be coming up with ideas. We have a strategic innovation fund that we will use to support proposals. We've had staff challenges. Last year we had an associate innovation challenge where we gave cash prizes, and they came up with products and services that were automated and new ways to use our AI tools. So I think it's differentiating that vision versus the people who are trying to encourage and move people along, and then the SMEs on the ground. But they have to be empowered to come up with their ideas so that you get it at all levels.
Yeah, awesome.
Can I pile in on this concept? I'll be brief. If anyone read the blog post that I put on the Change Leadership site in advance of this, it was about how I really hate the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because generally speaking, I just have a personal vendetta against folksy wisdom. I think the phrase fail fast is evil for reasons that I'll explain. Fail fast is usually this throwaway line that implies, figuring out how to be innovative is your job, but I'm not going to necessarily enable it to make it easier for you to actually accomplish this. And I've been exploring, what does it mean to actually fail fast? Should we reward people? Should I pay you every time you fail? I don't think it necessarily means that, but an easy trick for how to start doing this in your organization is reward people for the portfolio of results that they create. Not the individual successes and failures, but for the way that they approach their work and the net result at the end of the day, right? The net result in aggregate, right? So you screwed that up and that worked well, but as a result, the way you approach this whole problem worked out quite well, so congratulations. And I think that encourages more kind of intelligent risk-taking behavior without the narrow oversight that makes people afraid that they'll get slapped on the wrist anytime they go slightly out of line.
Okay, interesting. And Jay, you were going to say something to that?
Well, you know what? I just wanted to add is that there's still a lot of fear around AI as we had learned today, and one of our focuses now has become how can we help jobs that are at a risk of automation. So what we're gonna see now going forward with AI and with talent acquisition in organizations is that there's gonna be a huge focus on internal mobility. So for example, at a large bank, their internal customer support desk, those questions that you're sending them, it's very tedious. And once these support desks, get phased out, there's a whole business line of great talent that might have to be laid off. So we're going to use artificial intelligence to actually assess their soft skills, and because we have correlations of success predictors and other job roles, so we will just internally mobilize them to make sure that A, the organization doesn't have to hire new talent, and B, that talent is not laid off. So that's the other revolution that we're going to see now.
Okay, so I'm going to pose this question for all of the panel. Whose responsibility is it when it comes to retraining when we're looking at AI? So some skills are going to become redundant, there's going to be new skills. Is it the responsibility of the individual to say, how is the landscape changing and what do I need to do? Or is it the responsibility of the organization to say, these jobs are going to be going soon, so we're not going to need this, or we've introduced this technology, and then all of a sudden, and we don't really need per se this, Yes, there is some fear. Yes, some jobs will go and more jobs will come. So whose responsibility is it when it comes to retraining in the face of AI and robotics?
I have to admit, we haven't run into that yet, really. our change is slow enough, and the technology and AI and automation that we're putting in is not removing whole jobs. It's freeing up time so that over time, we, maybe in theory we might hire one less student 3 years from now, but even that, there is so many new opportunities coming up that even though this type of work has gone down, it's gone up over here. So we haven't run into the situation of actually getting rid of jobs.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you say that, because people immediately think AI is coming and it's replacing jobs, and it's not always the case per se. What's your thoughts on this, Daniel?
I think that the answer on this is it's still the same as it has been before, but the rate of change is faster, right? I think it's always been to some extent on everyone to focus on enriching themselves, keeping themselves current, and trying to adapt with where things are going, right? It's also always been on organizations, if they want to be successful, to focus on keeping their best people in the mix, on evolving them as their business changes, right? As their business changes, invariably there are people that they don't need, there are people they want to hold on to, and they want to move them into new roles. I think the unique challenge here is that the pace of change may be a lot faster than people are used to, and as a result, they stumble because it's usually, okay, I see a change off in the distance, I've got 5 years of runway, so I'll start to think about it, I'll start to take these steps, but all of a sudden, they only have 2 years, and it changes the way that people need to adapt.
Okay, and what's your take on retraining?
Well, I mean, in our view, what we see is that the organization, and very similar to what Dan had said, that if they want to stay competitive, and if they would like to show the world that they are truly an empathetic organization that cares about its employees, then they will allocate funding. Like if you take a look at RBC, they've put up $500 million for the future of work. So is Accenture now. And a lot of the other large banks within the US are facing this challenge. So the next step is, how can we work with a LMS, so a learning management solution, something like a LinkedIn Learning, to identify individuals that might be at the risk of automation, reskill them, and then just internally mobilize them. But I feel that education and for them to be reskilled should be the responsibility of the organization, and not specifically the individual.
Yeah. One of the points I really want to drive out from this, and when we're thinking about doing something on AI and robotics, was really what is going to happen to jobs, and one of the positive things about AI and robotics is that it frees the individual, to give them more time, like you mentioned, Mara. When I think about, medicine or the field of doctors, and, they're spending less time on administration and more time on patient care, so that's an advantage whereby it's freeing up time and it's not necessarily taking away jobs, so that's a good point to really raise. So we have 3 people here on the panel and 3 awesome people who are leading AI and doing things in AI. Do we have questions? Do we have people with the mic? Some questions. So we do have some questions.
Ask the hard stuff.
So we have one question.
Ask him the hard stuff.
Yeah, ask me the hard stuff.
Ultimately, as organizations are reframing their IT networks, there are going to be some people who exit. How would you frame that outcome as something other than downsizing or right-sizing when you're articulating it?
Okay, good. You took my advice. You asked the hard question. I think it kind of goes back to what I said before. Businesses have been changing since business, right? So it's never been news that invariably what we do will change and how we do it will have to change along with it. The same is true. In fact, the same is true even more so, I think, in the realm of technology. And just in the last decade or two, that pace of change, especially when it comes to technology or areas affected by technology, has really accelerated, right? So the message of what we do is different, and we either need to bring you into the fold and upskill you, or we don't have a role, we don't have a place for what you're capable of doing for us. That hasn't changed, but I think organizations need to take a somewhat more proactive role in recognizing that pace is faster than it has ever been, and focus on training, focus on anticipating the kind of skills that they are going to need down the road, and looking to their strong talent to bring them forward and make that change happen.
I might just add as well, I think one of the challenges that we face in law with the technology that's coming in is less about laying people off yet, but how we train our people. Because in law, the tradition is you learn by doing this grunt work. You learned how to do due diligence by going in with my dictaphone and going through contracts after contracts and doing summaries. Now that we don't do that anymore, how do we train the lawyers? And that's something we're very much struggling with, and trying to figure out how to totally pivot our professional development model and bring in, whether it's online, stronger coaching, how do we, so we're really struggling with that, and how do we do that in an age where the way we train is totally changing because of automation.
And I'm happy to help you out there.
We'll talk.
And if anybody has read the book, and that's some people got the book, which is Human Plus AI, I have to say that is an awesome book. It touches on everything to do with AI and robotics and how things are changing. And it's so new, it talks about GDPR as well. That's how new it is. And when I was reading that book, it spoke about things like training. So now how training is changing is that we're going to be training robots as well. So there are actually roles these days where you're training robots. So there's going to be a new cadre, of trainers who their role is just to train robots and how they're going to work with people. So all of that is really evolving and has started to evolve already.
Well, this is why there's just so many more new roles that are coming out. I mean, I just spoke to our summer students that started a couple of weeks ago and talked about the technology, and it's exciting. A lot of people think, it's a scary time to be in law because it's changing. But in fact, I think it's an amazing time to be in law because there's so many new roles that are coming up, and new ways to use your combined law along with other talents you have. So it's those new roles that I think are exciting. People are training the tools and doing that kind of stuff. So it's good.
Yeah, awesome.
In talking about this topic, I think it's bang on, right? It's not. I call it organic AI, right? It's the concept that AI, as opposed to a technology like an analytics platform, a CRM system, it's not deploy and then enhance and augment and whatever roadmap of change. There's an organic element to growing the solution more as a part of your workforce, training it and treating it that way in order to get the most value out of it, as opposed to build, dump, leave, and then hope it works.
Okay, thanks. You have.
To build on Mara's comments about the number of new jobs that are being created, I'm curious to know, and this may apply more to Accenture and to Osler than to your company, but what are you doing in terms of job postings and job descriptions and performance reviews? Because I'm struggling with a rapidly growing small business and trying to figure out how to keep up with all the job descriptions that I'm writing, and then this person I hired 3 months ago think that they have a different job than the one I want them to be doing now. So I'm just curious to know what you're doing.
Well, for one, I'm actually working on a new hire right now. I'm trying to focus less on the job description because it will change over time, and making sure that in that job description is built in that flexibility. And one of the things we're doing for actually hiring, and this came from our talent chief who's back there, is we're putting ads out in multiple places for multiple different type of people. So it's one role that we want. We don't know if we want a lawyer or a an allied professional, sorry, not a non-lawyer. We're trying not to use that term.
The other people.
So she suggested that we craft the ad to go to lawyers one way and to the business side the other way, and then we'll see what we get and which is the right mix. So it really is coming up with these different approaches to how we hire and not looking at it in such a traditional way that I think is great. When we hired our first legal project manager, this was probably 5 years ago, and we debated, do we hire a lawyer who knows something about project management, or do we hire a project management expert, who can learn the law? And in the end, we saw both, but really felt that the lawyers, the ones who came in with law degrees, our lawyers we didn't think would respond to them and would put barriers up to saying, don't tell me how to practice. So we ended up choosing actually we took an Accenture project manager. But I think it's looking at these roles in very different ways and putting ads out in different places and keeping these jobs flexible, because there's a lot that are turnover too. In these lower cost centers that we have of excellence, there is high turnover. There are new roles that never existed before, but people will do them for a couple of years and then move on. So it does take an entirely different talent model, and I leave that to Jeanette.
Yeah, so we have...
All right.
Thanks very much for a very insightful discussion so far. I'll just pivot a little bit. Whenever there's a big change, we know we are always saddled with some moral and ethical issues. Around AI, we've been talking about some of the challenges around data breach. I'm just wondering, are there other ethical dilemmas that you think or that you foresee? And what will be some of the ways to resolve that, since this is the future? Thank you.
That's awesome. And, Elon Musk has been one of the people who's been talking about the ethics of it and regulating AI and all of those things. Jay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, that's a great question. And the main concern at the moment with AI and with data is the way that it's being trained. So if you take an example, just like 2 years ago, out of MIT, there was this great PhD student, and her face could not be recognized because there wasn't enough representation in the data set, and she was African American, and she had to put on a white mask just to be seen by the algorithm. So that's like one example. About 6 years ago, Nikon was classifying Oriental eyes as "did you blink?" And Nikon, being a Japanese company, they should have known this. And with us, the greatest challenge is how to build inclusive AI technology. Breach. I mean, that's a whole different security concern. But very frankly, in this, at the moment, it's about how can we have technology that would cater to everyone and cater to them fairly.
So I'd add, too, that for us, just being a law firm, the two primary ones are, one, protecting the confidentiality of our clients' information. So security is huge. I have a standard 3-page list of security requirements for any vendor that we use in the cloud, and a 1-page list of commercial terms, because I'm tired of getting commercial licenses that say we have no risk, no liability, will not be responsible for anything, and no level of service. And I'm like, we're a law firm, we're giving you our client information. That's not acceptable. So we look at that. And then secondly is understanding how the system works, because as lawyers, we've got to exercise our professional responsibility. So we need to understand a little bit about how the system is going to work and how we're going to use it and incorporate it into the advice that we give our clients to make sure that we continue to meet those professional obligations.
I know Jay wanted to add something quickly, and then we had one more question in the audience. We still have one more right here. That would be the last.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know what? That's a great point, actually. And for us, we need that data to train our models. So sometimes some of the information is sensitive information, but we need to make sure that it's fully anonymized and completely stripped of any sort of trace to the originator. And we've had these conversations with law firms, and they say to us that, hey, anything that you develop and you learn from working with IBM or from working with Scotiabank is going to remain their property. But as an AI vendor who's solely relying to train their models and make their predictions better, we just cannot afford that. So we anonymize it completely, and we make sure that it's highly protected. But at the end of the day, that IP is our secret sauce, and that's the business that we're essentially in.
Okay, so let's take this brief question.
Yeah. Going back a bit to something a few of you mentioned, I work in education, and Maro, you were talking about the summer students coming in and talking with them about the new systems that you're using. And I'm just wondering, in terms, we heard the Dean of Rotman earlier talking about the skills needed, but coming from a profession like law, which is a formalized profession, so a regulated profession, what are you seeing, or what do you see are maybe challenges, or is the change being embraced by the faculties, by the law societies, and where we could go from there?
Yeah, I think it's slow in law. There's a few law schools who definitely are starting to change their curriculum. Osgood has a number of programs. They've got an internship. We actually have a law student intern this summer who's in our pricing and project management group, and they're working with a Chicago law school to do this law practice management program. So there are schools who are changing, but some are changing more slowly. So, it's still our responsibility as firms to take them in and begin the training at that point. So, we talk about the T-shaped lawyer now, so that they no longer can have just their deep expertise. They've got to have the T at the top that has agility, business development, financial literacy, technology skills, and we're training on all of those things and not relying on the law schools. I do think the schools have to change more, and that will come. As I say, there's lots that are, but it's slow.
Okay. Due to time, what would be that one part in sentence that you would give, just each one of you? So starting with Jay, what's the one big takeaway you want to leave with the audience when we think about, leading in the face of AI and robotics? Well,
the one thing I think I would say is that there are so many things.
Just one thing.
but if there's a lot of resistance in one country, and if they have a parent organization, I would say just go there and gauge that. That's what we've seen, and it's created that effect that we work with all customers in the U.S. and now everybody back in Canada wants to work with us. So I'd say just be very agile, and just if they're not accepting here, just take a look at the U.S. and then you can just come right back.
Okay, so that's a whole different discussion for 2.0.
Yeah,
when we talk resistance. Mara, what would be your one big takeaway?
I think mine would be around patience. Certainly, change takes time, and someone taught me a number of years ago when I was frustrated about somebody not coming out to demos or whatever, that she said all lawyers, and I suspect it's everybody, have to go through their own journey of bad idea, good idea, my idea. And I now find lawyers coming to me with their ideas of the technology they can use, and so I feel better that I've gone through that. So it's patience, and let them go through their my idea, bad idea, good idea, my idea.
Oh gosh, again, that's on the 2.0, because when you say patience and things are moving at this,
I know.
at the speed at which things are happening, how do you have patience when things need to happen very quickly? That's another question. And Daniel, what would be your one big takeaway?
I think it's one last piece of the research that my team and I have done on this concept of disruption, and it's that business has physics. The laws of physics apply. So there's gravity underpinning all the businesses that exist in today's environment. So doing what you've always done isn't enough because you're actually being pulled down all the time. So even just progress keeps you where you are, right? Revolution actually moves you forward. And the flip side of that is the easiest way to finally get going is to get going. It's to build up a little bit of momentum that makes it a little bit easier to build up a bit more momentum, which makes it a bit easier to move a little bit faster and a little bit faster. So don't spend a year trying to figure out what does this all mean for you. Spend a week trying to figure out a thing you can do, and then spend a month doing something more compelling, and then spend a year changing everything.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. That's great.